I always say to people that it is really reciprocal. Like I am getting all of those benefits as well. My mental health has improved significantly since I started Cheap Trill. My health in general has improved. Definitely my sense of belonging. I have felt more like myself in the past 10 years than I ever have before, or since I was a little girl. And that, I am so immensely grateful to the choristers in both of my choirs for holding that space for me as well. I think it works both ways.
Welcome to Leading Notes, where I talk with musicians who are leading the revitalisation of social health in our communities. I'm your host, Melissa Forbes. Emma Dean is a musician, performer and recording artist who founded the Cheap Trill Community Choir in 2014. Emma's career includes touring shows around Australia and internationally with performances off-Broadway and at Edinburgh Fringe Festival. She was a featured soloist in the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony and has written arrangements for John Farnham, Katie Noonan, Kate Sobrano and Glenn Shorrock. Emma's recent work includes writing and arranging music for the Emmy Award-winning show Bluey and serving as music director, songwriter and voice artist for all-girl puppet kids band Rainbow Bop. Emma conducts the Absolutely Everybody Choir for Upbeat Arts, working with marginalised communities, promoting social inclusion, positive mental health and overall well-being. Emma Dean, welcome to Leading Notes.
Oh my goodness, Melissa Forbes, it is such a pleasure to be here chatting with you today.
You have had an amazing career. I'm one of your biggest fans. I need to confess that up front.
The feeling is mutual.
You've had an amazing career as a performer and recording artist, but you've found yourself leading community music activities. Now, research is showing that gigging musicians can experience significant mental health challenges. They're dealing with precarious working conditions, constant pressure to stay relevant. Some researchers are even comparing pursuing a music career to gambling, calling it a form of cruel optimism. Have you experienced the cruel optimism of the music industry?
Oh, I love that term, cruel optimism. And the short answer is yes, absolutely. I have experienced cruel optimism. I feel like a lot of my career, particularly through my 20s and I guess early 30s, I was dealing with maybe even a form of addiction. I knew that, and it was a strange cycle whereby this thing I was chasing would kind of, I knew it was bad for me in a way, not the music itself. The music itself was magic and pure and wholesome and good. But this kind of struggle and hustle to achieve this, quote unquote success, to sort of make it in the music industry, and all that was required from me to achieve these things felt really bad. But then you'd get on stage and there would be this blissful moment of, this sort of transcendental kind of feeling where you're performing in front of an audience and you've got this beautiful exchange, and then you go, hey, this is great. This is amazing. It kind of feeds the addiction. And back you go to kind of the hustle and the knocking on all of the doors and the people who say, hey, I can do this thing for you, dangling a little carrot for years on end, and it not eventuating to anything. So it was this very cruel kind of space and this cruel cycle that I was going through. Lots of promises that were not met. And I think that cruel optimism, it was internal and it was external. And it was certainly not a sustainable way of living or of creating.
Wow, I love that idea. Well, I don't love the idea of addiction, but it's really interesting that you frame it in that way. Where did the compulsion come from?
Well, that's a really great question. And I've been thinking a lot about little Emma recently. And I guess what made me fall in love with music, but also what made me kind of jump into this music industry, kind of this hustle, this world of trying to kind of make it in the business. And I had this strange feeling, and a very real feeling when I was little, that if I was to become a famous musician, that all my problems would disappear, that I would be liked, and that I would be whole, and I wouldn't have to worry about all of the things I usually worried about. Now, as an adult, of course, I know often the opposite is true. um, but I think there was a deep desire in me to be accepted and to feel worthy. I think also along the way, particularly when I started writing music and when I started performing my own songs, there were voices around me that would say, oh, you're really good. You should do this. Oh, you should move outside of Brisbane. You should move to New York. This is what you should do. And so, it took a lot to sort of quieten those voices around me and tune into what actually made me happy. And that was many, many years in the making, really, to be able to do that.
Yeah, those shoulds, they can be a very, problematic force, I think, for a lot of musicians because, you're kind of told that you have this gift or something that you're really good at. And people, when they say those things, they're obviously trying to be supportive, but it then makes it feel almost like you're obliged to be better known or have a bigger profile or whatever.
That's exactly right. And I think now, knowing more about myself and what I value, that trajectory actually wouldn't have suited me very, very much.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I want to get into that a little bit later in the interview. So let's kind of pin that thought. Tell me about your formative years as a musician. What were the pathways as you understood them? When you were young Emma, what did you think were the pathways for you as a budding musician?
Yeah, this is another great question because I started out as a classical violinist. That was my love, my passion from the age of 6. And I guess at some point I thought that would be my pathway. I would, be maybe a soloist, but as I got a bit older, I realized that I probably didn't have what it took to be a solo violinist, certainly not in the classical music space. But at the same time, this was late high school, I started a band called Halo. And that's really where I developed this love for songwriting. And I guess a bit of a taste of what it was like to be in the spotlight. I was the front woman of Halo, and we had some really fun gigs. Actually, we played at the Boondall Entertainment Centre for the Rocksteadford Challenge, and I just got this. I don't know. I got bitten by the entertainment kind of bug, and there was no turning back. So, I obviously had to make a choice. Sadly, I had to make a choice between classical violin and, something to do with songwriting or performing. And I chose to audition for the Queensland Conservatorium of Music, and do jazz voice, which I didn't know very much about at all. I didn't know very much about jazz music. But back then, I guess there were not so many options. So anyway, I ended up doing this Bachelor of Music in Jazz Voice, which is where I met you. And I just remember feeling this strong message that the path of success is really a solo music career, being a soloist. So, whether that is in the classical music genre, or whether that was as a solo jazz singer, or whether that was as a singer-songwriter, but you needed to be a performer, like a performer. And I tried really hard for many, many years to make that work. And for whatever reason, it just kind of, it didn't, or it did, but not in the way that I thought it would. So yeah, it was a limited message that I felt like I was getting.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you mentioned that we were at the con together, and I totally agree that that was the message. However, if I'm thinking about, well, who said that and when did they say it? Well, they kind of didn't.
No.
There was no one was explicitly saying, that the true path to success is performance excellence, but there was obviously something around the way that we behaved and the way that our teachers behaved and the institution itself that was very much pushing that. It's almost like it was kind of subliminal, I guess, but I've been pondering that myself, trying to think, well, nobody ever actually really came out and said as much, but it was so strong, that message.
It really was so strong, and I think it had something to do about the alumni that were celebrated in so and so went to the Queensland Con, and in our kind of years, it was Kate Miller-Heidke and Katie Noonan and Megan Washington and all these amazing artists. And they were the ones that were being celebrated, particularly in that contemporary kind of jazz pop space. So, even though no one actually came out and said that, it was a weird message that was kind of just there.
Yeah. I think you're dead right about the alumni promotion, because that really sends the message. Well, we want people to be like this when they leave, and that's kind of they're the role models that you have to look up to. And of course, they're all amazing role models, but they're only one type of role model, right?
Absolutely.
And I think, when I asked you before about the pathways and you talked about the classical violin, and then you kind of moved into performing with Halo and going to the con, doing jazz voice, but you didn't mention that you kind of considered community music at that time, which is actually where you've kind of ended up working in quite a few different ways. So how did you find yourself making that kind of transition into, going from performing on like some huge stages with huge artists and doing that whole thing to then finding yourself on your parents' veranda? How did that all come about?
Yeah, it was certainly something I did not think about at all when I was at the con back in, however many years ago it was. Having said that, I was in, and I was remembering this recently, I was in a community music group myself. I was in a mandolin orchestra. So I had a little bit of experience as a participant, but it was very warped. I was the youngest of the orchestra by many decades. And so I just kind of got this impression. I didn't quite grasp the mental health aspects, the community kind of inclusivity and sense of belonging aspects back when I was 17, 18. I knew that I loved it, but I didn't really, it was something I did with my dad. And so I had a little taste of it, and then, pretty much never really thought about community music for, over a decade, until I was living in New York, trying to make it as a singer-songwriter. And I really hit rock bottom. I was hustling in a profound way. I had a job in a kids band during the day, and then by night I was performing on Off-Broadway. I was the opening act for Jinx Monsoon from RuPaul's Drag Race, and I think Courtney Act, and these amazing performers. But it was a grueling schedule. I wasn't being paid. The only way I could make money was staying to the very end. Sometimes that was 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and standing at the door while people exited and just holding out my CDs, kind of begging people to buy them. It was pretty, like, it was a full-on time. On a personal note, I was married and my marriage was not in a good way. And long story short, we ended up making the decision to come back to Brisbane. And before coming back to Brisbane, I had put out, I guess I was so, I was very mentally unwell myself, and I knew that something had to change. I knew that I needed to reignite or re-find the spark that I felt for music, because it was dissipating. It was just kind of, it was out of reach. And so I put out a message on Facebook and I said, hey, would anybody like to just join a singing group? I'm thinking, in my parents' lounge room, I could do the arrangements, just a bit of fun. And I didn't really think much of it, but the thought kind of, when I thought about it, it gave me this fizzy feeling, like, oh, well, that feels really good. That feels lovely, actually. And so the next morning I woke up, of course, I'm in New York time, so when I was sleeping, all these people were behind their keyboards commenting on this post and writing me direct messages on Facebook saying, I'm interested, I'm in, this sounds great. And I suddenly got this sense that people were hungry for something like this sort of singing group. So we started in January 2014. I think I had returned back to Brisbane just a couple of months earlier. And we started on my friend's veranda. An old student of mine, Janine Stack, her veranda in Everton Park, and it overlooked this paddock with cows. So we were singing to the cows, and we had a Wednesday and a Thursday night, about 20, maybe 15 or 20 people in both of those choirs. And as soon as I started, and at this point my marriage was looking pretty bad. It ended up ending, we divorced, but I know that I was feeling pretty horrible within myself. But every time I got together to sing with this group of people, some strangers, some old friends and colleagues and people I've studied with, I just got this feeling of calm, this feeling of excitement as well. And I looked forward to it so much every week. It felt wholesome. It didn't feel like I was hustling. It didn't matter if people couldn't come to rehearsals. It was like flexible. It was like low stakes. It was low stakes, and it was just all about the enjoyment. And I kind of realized, oh goodness, I have not experienced that since I was a kid when it came to music. It was always exams, study, like high pressure gigs. Oh, this can be fun too. And so from there, the choir grew and grew and grew until we could no longer fit on the veranda, until we were worried that we were going to fall through the veranda because we were getting so big. And 10 years on, we're still going. And it's one of the greatest joys in my life. And I try to get every person to join a choir. Now I'm such a nerd.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that journey to launching this choir on your friend's veranda. What is it? You were talking about the fizzy feeling when you kind of even conceptualized it, and you've mentioned to me before that this choir that you started, which has a really cute name, by the way, Cheap Trill, and that's double E, cheap. You've told me before that, like, when you started Cheap Trill, it was the one thing that felt like an open door to you. It felt like it just flowed. What was it about those circumstances, do you think, that made that thing feel different to some of the other musical endeavours that you've kind of pursued?
Oh, It sounds so simple. Really, when I when I think about it now in hindsight, I guess a lot of my work as a singer, songwriter, performer who is kind of really striving for that kind of spotlight always felt a certain way in my body. It always felt there was a feeling of dread, of deep anxiety, not the performance itself. That was always a place that I felt quite safe and at home in, but it was all of the stuff that surrounded the performance itself: anxiety, dread, just knots in my tummy. And I guess I just learned to live with that. I just, as so many people do, and it was more than just nerves, because I think nerves can be really fantastic and really helpful, but it was more than that. And so I think it was a very strange feeling and very foreign when I started this choir, getting a very different feeling all of a sudden, this kind of warmth and this, kind of a feeling of coming home and being able to be myself for the first time, my daggy, silly self, and not worrying about getting notes right or what I looked like or what how good the choir sounded. It was just this feeling of joy, and I guess this sense of a door opening and this flow was that suddenly I wasn't really having to hustle. Very naturally, people heard about Cheap Trill and gravitated towards it. And I do wonder if part of that was the fact that I started the choir because I was so deeply longing for connection and a belonging, a place to belong myself. So there was something perhaps in my energy that people were picking up on, that this was going to be a safe space for them to explore their voice and to find people that they can connect with. I don't know. It's one of those things I guess I'll never really know, but I think that is one of the reasons why it suddenly started to flow. People are a lot smarter really than I think we all give them credit for, in the sense that they can tell when someone's being authentic. And I think suddenly here I was being just completely authentic. and that can be magnetic for other people. But it took me a really long time to kind of to figure that out. It's such a simple thing.
Yeah. Simple and so profound, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you've really gone from strength to strength since starting Cheap Trill, and you've branched out into other community projects. Can you tell me about some of the other things that you've been doing in more recent times?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cheap Trill is now a registered charity. So we of course do our choir, and we also do workshops as well. One of my favourite things we've just started to do in the last 2 years is called This One Time at Band Camp, and it's a music theatre-ish summer camp for adults. And it's kind of a 3-day just jam-packed experience where we learn a crazy epic 17-minute arrangement of lots of well-known songs. There's usually a theme, but also there's dance and there's costumes, and it's just very camp and very fun. And then we have a big performance at the end for friends and family. So that's one of the other community experiences that we offer. And this year I've written a musical, so that's going to be another offering from Cheap Trill, a bit of an extension of what we do, and certainly the biggest thing we've ever done as an organisation. But I've also recently become the conductor for the Upbeat Arts Choir, which is called Absolutely Everybody. and it is a choir for people living with mental illness or from marginalised groups. And it's, again, I found, I think, even a new layer of just, I don't even know what the words are, magic and healing, because I think this choir, and I've of course just taken over from the old conductor, and it is a choir that has not only helped people's lives and enriched people's lives, but it's certainly saved people's lives, I think. So the power of music, it never ceases to amaze me.
And obviously, you're working with such a diverse range of people in all of these projects. How do you, and you yourself, I might just add for our listeners, are a highly accomplished musician, like, technically brilliant, just such an amazing musician. How do you communicate with people, say, in the Absolutely Everybody choir, where most of those people probably don't have any, musical education or whatever? Like, what are the strategies that you use to translate what you know as a musician in terms of, the skills and stuff? How do you translate that to all of these different people that you find in front of you in these groups?
Oh, it's definitely, it's been something I have learned through trial and error over the last 10 years, and I get it wrong and sometimes I get it right, and it's been a really interesting learning process for me, because like you said, certainly in Cheap Trill there's 100 people at a time that I'm conducting, all with different learning styles and abilities. So and also some people who are vision impaired, and all sorts of things to consider. So I try to cater for all of those learning styles. We offer guide tracks. I think that is one of the biggest tools, because most of our choristers love to learn through listening to my voice or my brother Tony Dean's voice singing the songs. So we offer lyric sheets to those who would prefer to learn via lyric sheets. We offer the music score to those who can read music and really like to be able to follow those dots on the page. And I think also physical gesture is really important. And I don't quite know what I do. I know it looks very funny because I've seen videos of myself, and I feel like it's some sort of aerobic workout / interpretive dance that I do, and for whatever reason, it kind of works. Part of that is, I think, developing a language, really, a physical language between you and your choir members. Something that, even if it's not technically, like I've done one workshop in conducting, so I am not a technically brilliant conductor at all, but the movement and the gesture that I use with my choir, they've gotten to know and can respond really quickly to that. And it's the same for upbeat arts. In fact, upbeat arts are so interesting because they are so hungry to know about technique, what different musical terms mean. So I sometimes assume that no one wants to know that, it's boring, but actually both, in upbeat arts and cheap trill, people actually really want a little bit more info. So I just kind of cater to what is there, who is there, and what's coming at me at the at the time. But I think those are the ways. Oh, the other thing actually is that I think lowering the stakes and lowering the status is a really big thing I tend to do when I'm teaching.
Yeah.
So I like to enter a room not by getting in a mindset that I'm the boss and I know everything and I'm here to impart my knowledge and you will do what I say, and this is how it's done. But I try to enter a room with people thinking, great, I'm going to be a sponge and I want to learn from you guys, because every rehearsal is different. I'm constantly learning and picking up on things that I'm being fed from their body language and what they're doing. So I'm adjusting all the time. But it's, I really, really think that people excel when they feel safe and when they feel like they're not being judged harshly. I think so for me, yeah, just entering on the same level as everybody else. Yeah, but knowing that I am leading, obviously,
Yeah.
but not making that like a dictatorship kind of, like it's just a really gentle, it's a gentle thing. That works too for me.
And so is it any different to when you would be performing with your band in terms of like the musical communication? You know, what are the differences, or are there any?
Ooh, I I feel like I think it feels different, because
Okay.
perhaps in my experience working in a professional band setting, sometimes there are question marks about who is the leader. So, and ego comes into play a little bit, and it can be a little tricky. But I think it is established in Cheap Trill that I am the leader of the group. I don't
Yeah.
go around saying that I'm the leader of the group,
Dear leader.
but it's a dear leader. But it's, they know that I'm the conductor and that, if they have a question, they can come to me. So, yeah, I guess there are similarities, but definitely a different feeling in my belly when I think about it.
Yeah, I get that. I just was thinking as you were talking about how you work with your groups, that so much of what you do is kind of gestural and embodied, and that's the type of communication that anyone can kind of latch onto and understand. And you will know, working in community settings, that there are so many people who don't feel like they have the right to be there, because they haven't got the training or they can't read the dots on the page or whatever. But in actual fact, a lot of the musical communication that occurs between trained musicians is gestural and embodied and intuitive as well, So anyone can kind of be in on that conversation.
Absolutely. I think you and I both know that, probably some of the best musicians we've worked with or that I've worked with are not trained, traditionally trained musicians. I think music is for everyone. And that is definitely something we try to drum into anyone who joins either of my choirs, that this is a space for everyone. And I think gesture is something, it adds another layer. And I think I started dance when I was 2. And dance for me, actually, there was a period where I thought I would be a dancer. Until my teacher told my bum was too big when I was a young girl. Can you believe it? Terrible. But
That'll kill your dreams, right there.
that'll kill the dreams, the ballet dreams, exactly. But and then I went on to do some training with Zen Zen Zo physical theatre, and so physicality has always been a really big part of the way I perform, and now obviously the way that I conduct community groups as well. Where it gets really interesting is that for a long time, everyone in my choir had sight, and along the way, maybe 5 years in, a wonderful man called David Trung joined, who was completely blind, and suddenly I went, oh, gesture's not going to work here. So I had to figure out vocal cues as well to sort of cue him. So it's like always, I guess, adding to your tool belt, depending on who is in the group, which is actually so exciting. I love that.
Yeah. It's always, you're always learning new ways to navigate through those differences, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I love talking to you about this because I just see that you're so alive and you're so energized and so passionate when you talk about the work that you do. To me, you're like such a great example of somebody who's doing work that's perfectly suited to who you are, what you value, what your skills are. What does it look like and feel like for you to be doing this work
Oh,
now, in this day, this time, this place? How's it working out for you, Emma?
it is, I feel really privileged. I feel very grateful to be doing this work and to have finally found something that truly aligns with who I am. I still get that beautiful creative payoff. Like I do the arrangements, most of the arrangements for my choirs. And even write some songs and things like that for my choirs. And so I've got that amazing kind of creative juice that's always flowing. But there is a real sense that this work helps people's mental health. It helps to create a sense of belonging for people. It helps, combat loneliness and all of these added benefits, and it feels fantastic to be part of that. I always say to people that it is really reciprocal. Like I am getting all of those benefits as well. My mental health has improved significantly since I started Cheap Trill. My health in general has improved. Definitely my sense of belonging. I've felt more like myself in the past 10 years than I ever have before, or since I was a little girl. And that, I am so immensely grateful to the choristers in both of my choirs for holding that space for me as well. I think it works both ways.
Yeah, wow. You've had such a remarkable journey as a musician and as a person to find yourself doing this work now. And I want to ask you, which is always a hard question, but what do you know about yourself now that you would have told little Emma?
It is a hard question. Oof. Little Emma, little Emma was so shy and so unsure of herself and her power. She was very depressed and different. And I think if I knew back then that all of those things would somehow play a role in the job that I do and enable me to have a sense of empathy for others, um, and yeah, I think I would kind of say, hold on, little Emma,
Yeah.
it's coming. All of
Yeah.
these things, I promise, will make sense. And
Yeah.
also, I tell her to like lean into the dagginess because it's fun. Like, I think daggy is the new cool. That's what I
Amen.
think.
Amen.
Yes.
We might need to translate daggy for international listeners because I'm not sure it's a universally
Oh,
used term, but
I never knew that.
yeah, maybe you'll have to look up like Australian Urban Dictionary or something. But it was definitely a term that was around when I was growing up, in the 80s as a kid, and the daggy ones were the uncool ones.
Uncool. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Uncool is the new cool.
Emma, as we draw to a close, let's bring it back to music. And I want to ask you, what song makes you feel truly alive?
Well, my answer is it's very topical. It's to do with the movie Wicked.
Okay.
Um, at the moment, I feel so alive when I listen to the latest version of Defying Gravity.
Yeah, it's
This is
pretty awesome.
It is insane.
Yeah.
It's performance at the most elite level. and just so much heart and so much feeling. A song I have always wanted to sing and will still strive to do so. Maybe one day we could do a duet. Mel? Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. We'd have to take it down a few tones, I think.
That's fine. I'm here for that. The transpose button.
I love that choice of song because actually, you know, it speaks so much to little Emma, I think, Defying Gravity, don't you think?
It really does. Yeah. It really does. It gives me that fizzy feeling that I was talking about. Yeah.
Emma Dean, thank you so much for being my guest here today. Thank you for making music that matters, and thank you for being a part of Leading Notes.
Such a pleasure and an honour, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to leave a review. I acknowledge that this podcast is produced on the lands of the Gayabal and Jarowair peoples of the Toowoomba region, and I pay my respect to all elders. Mark Schultes produced the original music for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go make music that matters.